K183 is one of 5 operational K classes in preservation, and its history is quite remarkable, being one of the last steam engines in service, to being in a fatal accident, to being restored and running around Victoria today. Early life. Built in September 1943 as a member of the second batch of K-class consolidation types, K183 would do what the other K-classes usually did: haul branch line trains and odd jobs. During the war, very little care was given to the engine, and it had become very worn throughout the war years. After the war, the engine was given light maintenance at Bendigo and Ballarat workshops, where in one of these trips, it received a new front bogie. K183 had worked out of several loco depots throughout the years. These included Ararat, Geelong, and North Melbourne. Twilight years. In 1964, after several decades of being worked into the ground, it was given a major overhaul. And then, before the VR got their money's worth, she was put in storage at Ararat in 1969, where K183 would be shedmates with K160, K162, K190, and J549. In 1974, after sitting a siding for half a decade, she was reactivated and promoted to the Bendigo workshop pilot, replacing a member of the K-class, K174, and itself being replaced by another K-class, K190, in June of 1976. After its main steam pipe, the component which carries steam from the boiler to the pistons, failed several times. Due to this, it was taken off the register in December of 1976, after 28 years of regular service and 5 years in storage. Preservation. The future wasn't looking bright, and if it wasn't purchased, the VR would have scrapped her. Thankfully, in 1977, K183 was sold off to the Shire of Narracan. It was plinthed outside Yarragon Station, and it would stay static for 5 years, which seems to be a running theme for K183's life, until 1982, where Steam Rail Victoria swapped the loco with K162. K183 was regarded as having the best boiler condition as well as mechanical condition of any steam locomotive in Victoria at the time, and that's most likely due to the major overhaul it was given in 1964, and it doing very light work for its remaining years in service. K162 is still at Yarragon today, only disguised as K183. K183 was towed to Melbourne, and it arrived at its new home, and its current home, the Newport Workshops, in March of 1982. It was put up in the top shop, and work on restoring the engine commenced in 1985, with things really picking up speed in 1987. With a total cost of $30,000 and 7 long years, K183's fire was lit on the 16th of September 1992, and it moved under its own power on the 3rd of December that same year, having been mostly static for 15 years. It was officially relaunched by the Transport Minister at the time, Mr. Alan Brown. Unfortunately, it wouldn't last operational in preservation for long. The 2002 accident. On the 12th of October 2002, K183 was involved in a fatal level crossing accident at Benalla. Background. Approximately at 5:50 PM, a B-double truck carrying flour from Avenel, bound for Blacktown, New South Wales, was approaching the Sales Yard Road level crossing on the Yarrawonga line, just a stone's throw away from Benalla Station. At the time, the Yarrawonga line was still broad gauge, only being converted a few years later. This truck was owned by Green Freight Limited, based in Wodonga. K183 was on a special charter for a wedding party function, hauling rolling stock from West Coast Rail. A train with K183 leading, Power Van DT319, carriages BK712, BRS 221, BRS 225, and WAL 951. Late running. The journey down to Yarrawonga was relatively uneventful, except for the train being late. Arriving at Yarrawonga, the consist was stabled there overnight, and being set to return the following morning. However, the crews of the locomotive were required to take at least 11 hours of rest, so the train set off from Yarrawonga 42 minutes behind schedule at 11:42, which wasn't too much of a problem, as the Yarrawonga line is a freight-only line with a minimal amount of trains. The consist was given the go-ahead by Freight Australia at 9:48 AM. The train travelled along the Yarrawonga line with minimal issues, passing several small grain-producing towns, as well as 38 level crossings, where the driver correctly blew K183's whistle to warn Gunzels and other normal people about the approaching several tons of metal. Approaching Benalla. On the approach to Benalla, K183 would travel over several curves, traveling around 39 km per hour, gradually increasing to 48 km per hour, which is well below the speed limit for the Yarrawonga line at the time. It sailed over Racecourse Road level crossing, located 1.8 km away from Benalla station, around 45 seconds before imminent doom. From the cab, the fireman of K183 noticed a B-double truck hauling flour running parallel to them on Gill Street, which turned to be parallel with them on Racecourse Road. Thinking nothing of it, he continued with his business, but he didn't break his gaze. He then saw the truck about to make a left turn on Sale Yards Road level crossing, reasonably expecting it to stop and to wait for the hurtling steam-powered wrecking ball to pass. However, the driver didn't stop. Collision. At 12:50 PM, K183 collided with the said double B truck. The sudden impact caused K183 and its tender, DT319, and the leading bogie of the first carriage, BK173, to derail. K183 jumped the tracks and absolutely smashed into a soft pile of earth next to the tracks, coming to a stop at an alarming angle, being turned nearly 90 degrees by the inertia from the tender and the coaches. Unfortunately, the locomotive's crew and one of the two spectators in the cab were fatally injured. The other spectator in the cab was taken to hospital in critical condition. It's not known if they survived or not. The other passengers inside the train were mostly unharmed. As for the driver of the truck, he also sustained no injuries besides shock. Aftermath. The damage to K183 was extensive. After the impact, the locomotive's front was heavily crushed, losing a buffer, crumpling the smoke deflectors, and warping a cylinder block. The cab where the crew were was badly mangled. When K183 came off the tracks, the tender forcefully shoved itself into the cab, disfiguring the cab structure. The tender also forced itself into the upper controls of K183, damaging the safety valves. This also broke the bolts which connected the controls to the boiler. The boiler was also suspected to have been damaged. You can see a dent here. Damage to the B-double truck was also extensive, especially where the second segment was connected to the truck, as K183 plowed straight into it, causing significant damage to the trailer and the main truck. Aside from K183 and the tender, the rest of the consist remained relatively unharmed, although DT319 sustained slight body damage, and BK712 only derailed with no visible damage. The driver of the B-double truck was charged with reckless driving after the accident. Life after the accident. After the accident, people very correctly predicted that K183 would never run again, and at the time, they were right. The locomotive was taken back to Newport in a sorry state. It was heavily damaged for the next 18 years, and was stored in the wasteland of the Newport workshops with an uncertain future. On the 30th of June 2020, the locomotive was moved from the East Block to the much less dead West Block for a restoration assessment. The restoration of K183, returning it to mainline service, commenced shortly after. Quite a bit of work had to be done to the engine, but just 3 months later, Steam Rail's mechanics team had finished all the major components for the restoration. Based on the assessment, Steam Rail concluded that the engine could be fully restored to mainline standard, with key components miraculously being at running standard, such as frames, driving wheels, and boiler, all being usable with very little work. Apparently, the boiler was okay after all. Static steam tests were conducted for the first time in June of 2021, and the engine moved for the first time under its own power on the 15th of September 2021, with mainline tests occurring on the 7th of October the same year, along the South Kingsville freight line. It joined K153 in its first public tour in November, on shuttle trips from Flinders Street to Sandringham, and it's still seen frequently on steam tours today. And to know when it's running next and where, see SteamRail's website and follow their Facebook. Not sponsored. With such an interesting history, you can see why I like K183 and it's a mascot of this channel. And this video would be the 50th video including shorts that I have uploaded, as well as my 1000 subscriber special. Like and subscribe, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.